Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Get Connected C-Suite Mentoring and our master class with thought leaders from across industries and sectors. If you are new to Get Connected and have never experienced it, we are Boston's premier inclusive business networking event that brings cross-cultural people together to forge new relationships, both social and professional. We encourage leadership development through programs like this. And we also like it to be fun and interactive. If we were out and not sheltered in place, we would say you should get at least 5 new connections while you're at a Get Connected. But you could still do that because you can do that in the chat. You can leave your name, your number, your how to connect with you. And I want to also give a shout out to the Get Connected team led by my able Mirav Avshai, my chief admin, and Ariel Lee, Yoki Gu, and Fernanda Tribalio. And of course, our producer of this wonderful event, without whom none of us would know what we're doing on Zoom, we have Lars Eric Suren. So we are so grateful to all of them. And tonight we have 2 incredible members of the C-Suite Get Connected CEO Network. They have been part of our network now for, I believe, 5 years. And because this is our 5th. And so we want to thank them both. They are both people I've known for a long time. One is Michele Courton Brown, and Michele has been in business, or she's a social entrepreneur, I like to say. I met her in the financial service business when I did consulting work for Bank Boston, and she was very instrumental in supporting and funding a lot of different initiatives in Boston when she headed up the foundation there, and then went on to do the same at Fleet Boston when the 2 institutions merged. And so I love the fact that Michele has sort of gone across several industries, which is a lesson for all of us that we shouldn't get stuck. So often we think when we are in one career or one industry, we cannot move either vertically or horizontally. And she has proven that you can do it successfully, with grace, with style, and with influence. She's the CEO of Quality Interactions, which is an organization I believe every medical outlet and center and hospital should be involved with right now, particularly because so many people of color are impacted by COVID. And what they do is really help members of the medical field become culturally competent through cultural intelligence and helping them better understand how their cultural competence and intelligence can make them better physicians, better nurses, better providers of quality health care. So thank you, Michele, for being with us for 5 years. And of course, Leverett Wing. Leverett I have known for a long time. And even though he has been in the real estate industry and have been at the core of who he is really a social entrepreneur. He has leveraged and helped and worked across culturally diverse communities for many years. very active in the Asian community and in politics, and making sure that all of us, particularly people of color, have a voice at the table. He was the head of the Asian Pacific Political Caucus in Washington and commuted there from Boston. And now he was also appointed by Deval Patrick as the head of the Asian American Commission when Governor Patrick was governor. And he is now the head of the Commonwealth Seminar, a partner of Get Connected. And the Commonwealth Seminar actually helps people, particularly who are immigrants and newcomers to this country, better understand how to leverage their civic empowerment to effect change, to get involved. Several of the people who have gone through the program, I am so delighted to say, have run for public office and won. And so Leverett continues to make an impact in our community. So welcome to both Michele and to Leverett. Thank you for being here. And my first question is going to go to Michele. Michele, you, in my introduction to you, you heard what I said. We are in the throes of the most horrific pandemic in the history of the world. And this is not just a pandemic that's affecting America, it's one that's affecting everyone. Every aspect of our lives, every business has been impacted by COVID. And given what you are doing now, I would like to ask, as a CEO, how are you coping? How are you dealing with this new normal? Or as a friend of mine said, new reality. There's nothing normal about what we are going through.
It's a great question, Colette, and it's one that's an evolving answer. I think first and foremost, most leaders are focused on caring for their people. This whole notion of resiliency, we've heard a lot about resiliency in the last decade or so. In fact, I think Mayor Marty Walsh has a chief resiliency officer, right? And cities around the country were building out resiliency offices. And I was curious about that role, but then this pandemic hit. And if anyone was curious about why we need resiliency skills in our society, it's what we're facing now. We don't have a roadmap for what's going to be in front of us. So it's really a matter of managing day to day. It's a matter of synthesizing data that's in front of us and trying to build thoughtful plans in the intermediate term, but also recognizing that we're going to have to be flexible and that we're going to have to develop some new sets of skills. You know, I think one skill that many of us have adapted to is what we're doing now, having an online conversation authentically, and how you do that and how different that is from having the opportunity, as we've had for the last 4 years, to sit in the wonderful offices of Blue Cross Blue Shield amongst one another, touching one another, conversing, looking into each other's eyes. We don't have that opportunity in the same way right now. So how do we develop authentic experiences, right? I also think that in the midst of this pandemic, we have an opportunity to evaluate what our core values, our core value proposition is as business leaders, and think about how we innovate and deliver that in different ways. So for us, we sell our product to hospitals and health plans. This wasn't the moment to go in and try to sell training. This was the moment to support and advocate, develop open source tools and skills that we can offer up, resources we can offer up to folks, and to do some active listening about what our clients are going to need on the other side of this. And so while in many ways this has been paralyzing, in other ways it's been highly mobilizing of myself and my staff as we are planfully working for life after we go back to whatever this new normal is going to be.
Thank you, Michelle. That is so on target. Last week, our first Get Connected kickoff, or maybe it's the second one, we did a event called Don't Panic, Pivot. And we talked about the 3 A's, myself and Carol Roby. And we talked about adaptability, agility, and agency. And that's exactly what you were talking about. We have to adapt to be resilient, and we also have to be agile and nimble, and to sort of take the Scrum approach, which is very quickly doing things in a short, very complex things in a very short time, which is what you and your team are doing right now. You are taking the Scrum approach. And as we move forward, how do we sort of create the next 20 years in the next 12 months? So thank you for that. And I will turn this to Leverett. And Leverett, your organization, a lot of what you do is really face-to-face, because you are helping to train people, to connect people, to help them understand how they can be engaged in their community. You're empowering them to go out and make a difference. How has that changed for you as the head of that organization?
It's been difficult. I mean, nobody saw this coming. We actually had our last graduation on March 11th, which was the day that I think it was the governor, or I think the governor started to forbid gatherings of 10 people or more. We just snuck in under the wire with our graduation. I'm not sure what we would have done at that point with 1 day to go, but it's been difficult. We had to adapt. I think what Michelle said and what you said as well are right on the button. Kind of going back to your introduction of me, I've had a number of different job descriptions. Right now, I'm running the Commonwealth Seminar. Our mission is to open the doors of government to underserved communities, particularly communities of color. Before that, I ran a real estate agency, managed close to $7 million in assets. Right after that, I ran a state agency for Department of Housing and Community Development, where we had over $300 million in assets. And I also ran a small nonprofit where we had 0 assets and 0 commissioners, and as you mentioned, I ran a national nonprofit. One of the main things that relate to all of those things, and perhaps to our environment now with COVID-19, is what you had mentioned before: adaptability. Learning to adapt and learning to learn. Being able to learn new skills. Being able to adapt to new ways of thinking. And just kind of change as much as possible. And then on top of that is I lean heavily on our networks. The Commonwealth Seminar has over a dozen community partners, and we lean on them to help us get the word out. I mean, one of the things that's happened in this COVID-19 pandemic is that our constituency, our student body, communities of color have been hit hardest. And you can see the gap widening, both in terms of economic disparity and healthcare. And that is something that that's unacceptable right now. And what we need to do, and what the seminar is doing, is we are hosting a number of individual lunch and learns for folks, so that folks can tune in and learn about COVID-19 and how it affects their communities. We're working with Boston Medical Center and Partners Healthcare to host a lunch and learn in a couple of weeks about the effects of COVID-19 on mental health in underserved communities. And then after that, we'll have one on the epidemiology of COVID-19 in underserved communities. So we're trying our best to educate and bring this type of knowledge to our communities, where previously, let's be honest, these communities were really left by the wayside and really underserved. So that's what we're trying to do. And on top of that, we'll be hosting our next seminar in the spring. It'll be like this. We'll have Zoom meetings, we'll have breakout rooms, we'll have webinars, but that goes back to adapting, learning new skills. I mean, before this all hit, I had no idea what Zoom was. I had no idea how to, people would yell at me, gallery mode. And I'd say, what are you talking about? So now I know, you have to learn these skills. And in order for an organization to survive, you have to learn, you have to be able to adapt. And one of the ways that we learn to adapt is through our networks. Our networks are the folks who are helping us outreach to a lot of our constituencies and helping us learn these new skills. So it's the networks and it's the ability to adapt, learn new skills, a new mindset, and new ways of thinking we're trying to use those to carry us through this.
Well, thank you, Leverett. And I'm so glad that you mentioned network, because Get Connected is a networking organization. And for those of you who have been a part of Get Connected for the last 12 years, you always hear me say that your network is your net worth. And I cannot tell you how very important leveraging your network is at this time, particularly for people who may feel isolated and self-distancing, social distancing. This is the time for you to really have connectivity. One of the things that the human spirit and the human beings need is the ability to connect with other people. And I want to encourage people to do that. I was watching CNN the other day, and they were talking about the fact that calls to hotlines, crisis hotlines, went up 900%. And even on our last two events, our last two Zoom conferences, one of the questions that came up was dealing with isolation and with loneliness. And so part of what we are doing now in this webinar is really to connect with each other, to find the skill sets and to rely on each other. The interconnectivity of this all is so important. So I'm going to go back to Michele. And Michele, this is the time when people are thinking about pivoting because of the fact that there are some people who have lost their jobs. There's some people who have been furloughed, and there are people who might be a little bit in their heads thinking, this might be the time for me to transition into something new. I'm going to ask you, as somebody who has worked across numerous industries and held serious high-level positions, what advice would you give to people at this time?
Well, that's such a great question. I don't know in my adult life when the last time was I was in my own head, in my own space for 6 weeks, right? And this is an opportunity, I think, to be really reflective about how you want to live, your next leg of the journey. Early in my career, I used to plan in 5-year increments. I would spend some time trying to envision what were the elements of things I wanted to do. What were the skills I wanted to have? What were the experiences I wanted to garner in the next 5-year period? And then I would map out what was the pathway to get there. And that sounds a little bit, vague, but one way to get there is to do some networking, to identify people whose career arc is something that you might want to emulate, and build a bridge and spend a little time researching them. LinkedIn is a wonderful way to get to know people. And then as you outreach, maybe have a set of questions for them around what was their journey, what was their pathway, what were the skills in their toolbox that they felt were necessary to have them be successful in this realm. I imagine there's somebody on this call who's feeling pretty vulnerable about their job right now, or thinking about, gee, I've been doing this for a long time, but is this really what I want to do on a go-forward basis? This is a real golden opportunity to mind your LinkedIn profile or network for people that you might want to reach out to. People have a lot of spare time right now, a lot. And people are looking for ways to connect. And Zoom calls are great for intimate conversations between one or two people. This is a great time to do a little bit of exploration about what you might want to do next. And I would suggest that you spend some time thinking about that, and then reflect back about what is your what's your own elevator pitch, what's your own marketing pitch about who you are and what your strengths are. Write them down. Really internalize them. Think about, I'm really good at this, and my proof point of that is X. I've garnered skills doing X, Y, and Z. That could be applicable here or it could be applicable there. But begin to allow yourself to expand your thinking about what you're capable of doing and what people might be interested in having you do. Because the best way for you to market yourself is to really be confident that you have something to offer. In almost every job I've taken, and I've had jobs in large corporate C-suite roles, I've worked in leadership and nonprofit, I've done some work in the governmental space, I've had the privilege of having some leadership roles in nonprofit, and I've been an entrepreneur. But across that spectrum of 4 different arenas, strong communication skills are necessary, good networking skills are necessary, strategic thinking is necessary, and there's also the opportunity to cross-pollinate. There are things that you learn in one dimension that can really benefit you in others. But you have to open your mind up to the set of skills that you actually possess and think about how you unlock them in different ways.
That is a brilliant answer, Michele. And I have to say that it resonated with me because this week alone, I have had, in the last couple of days, 2 C-suite executives who have reached out to me to ask about coaching. One was interested in personal branding and life post-COVID, and the other wanted to leverage my network for connections. And so they both said, we'd love to engage your services because we feel like we need that right now. So thank you for that brilliant response. And I will go to Leverett. Leverett, I wanted to ask you about where do you see, for example, your organization? How do you prepare as the executive director of a nonprofit that has been primarily focused on connection in the same room, interacting with people? And I know you mentioned about some of the things that you are planning in the future, but have you and your board sort of thought about, what the next 6 months might look like? Because we really don't know for sure, even though they said we're going to be back in May 18th. We don't know. I think we don't know this. So can you kind of share, because I think we want to help people think about what life is going to be like post-COVID.
Yeah, it's about, I think I mentioned it earlier, it's about trying to be as flexible as possible because we don't know what's going to happen. We don't even know what's going to happen next week. Who knows? There could be another spike if we decide to start opening up the state again after May 18th. We don't know what's going to happen within the next week, month, 6 weeks. So the key that we've been trying to do is we've just been trying to come up with some short-term goals, short-term activities, and then start to plan out a little bit long-term with plans A, B, and C. It's similar to just sort of life in general. I mean, life is never ever going to be as smooth as you want it to be. You know, life is always going to throw you curves. This one happens to be a major, major curve. As I mentioned, when we had graduation a month and a half ago, no one, you know, we just assumed that we would have another session just like it was in June, just like it was back in January, February, and March. We just assumed that, but you can't go on those assumptions. So just come up with different plans to, moving forward. I think Michele mentioned that she had downtime. When you have downtime, you're able to plan, and this is actually an opportunity to kind of do some reflection, take care of yourself. One of the things that, you know, we talk about health during COVID-19. You know, the other thing besides the physical health, it's your mental health, it's your spiritual health. This is the opportunity to kind of get those things whole, because you can't move forward effectively or as effectively if you're not whole yourself. It's similar to when you're on an airplane and they tell you during the safety instructions, if the mask drops down, put the mask on yourself first and then take care of your child next. Because without you being whole and without you being well, you can't take care of anybody else. So what we're doing is we're trying to make sure that we as an organization are whole by planning individual events to try to continue to move forward. And then that's how we might try to make our organizations, our constituents, our students, and our alumni whole. And it's funny, you talk about having it be difficult. A week from tomorrow, I don't know if you remember this, Colette, I think Mirav would remember this. A week from tomorrow, we're supposed to be honoring you at our annual spring event called In the Room and at the Table, which is our annual event, because nobody puts people in a room better than Colette, and nobody puts people at the table better than Colette. So we were going to honor Colette, but at our annual spring fundraiser, and we're not going to do that. So, you know, one of the things we have to do, and we're working with our advisory board and we're working with our team, is to try to be innovative, try to figure out different ways where we can host this event and figure out different ways where we can maybe make this a year-long Colette celebration. I mean, clearly I'll work with you and Mirav on that, but that's just one example of how we have to adjust and how we have to adapt. And because this is also going to be a fundraiser, it's also on us to host these things to survive, because organizations without money, they can't survive. So it's important for us to take it, again, short steps to ensure sort of things move forward, but then make plans A, B, and C, so that you can then be as adaptable as possible for whatever situation arises.
Good answer. Thanks, Leverett. And Michele, I'm going to ask you this question. What can someone do at this time? One of the reasons why we are doing this mentoring, because I'm a firm believer in that mentors matter. Every successful person I know have not gotten there by themselves. They've gotten there through mentors and sponsors. So I'm going to ask, what in these uncertain times, what can people do if they are thinking about jump-starting their career? You know, I believe very strongly that in the midst of adversity lies opportunity. You know, the Asian culture, and this is Asian Pacific Heritage Month, so let me salute my Asian brothers and sisters. The coin for opportunity is the same coin for travesty. So how do you take adversity or travesty and turn it into opportunity? So I'm going to ask you that.
That's another good question, Colette. I think I'm going to try not to have an ADD moment on you, but I'm going to try to do this a little bit. I think it starts with you. Leverett talked about getting whole, or trying to evolve to getting whole. That sometimes is a process. I think the other part of that process is knowing where you want to go, if not exactly, what your destination is going to be, but have a sense of what it is you want your North Star to be. If you've been in finance for the last 15 years and what you want to do is break free, maybe you're working in a large corporate and you want to go work in nonprofit, then that is a North Star that you can follow, and you can begin to build your network around identifying people who can help you get there. So I think the first thing is taking the time to be clear, and you're doing that in a trauma moment. To be clear, this is a traumatizing experience. A lot of us don't know, with certainty where we're going to be in 2 years or 36 months or whatever. So we have to acknowledge that. I saw another question in the chat box about, are leaders transparent about uncertainty and their own concerns about that? I think this is a time to be a little vulnerable. I know I start my staff meetings, we have leadership team meetings twice a week, and I start my meetings asking people how they are. I care. But also, I think it's helpful for people to know that there's a culture for caring and a culture for sharing. And I think that if you're home by yourself and you're trying to figure out how to jumpstart that, I highly recommend developing what I describe as your own kitchen cabinet. Mentors are awesome. And sponsors are awesome. I've had both, and I think you should cultivate them. At the same time, I've developed a kitchen cabinet of about 12 people that I consider my personal board of directors. And I engage them from time to time as I am, contemplating aspects of my career or my life. And I think if you don't have a specific mentor in this moment, if you start with that kitchen cabinet, identify 4 to 8 people in your universe, and they can vary, right? It could be a former manager at a company you used to work with. It could be a friend who's in a different career. It could be somebody from college. But identify some people who you admire, who you think can support your thinking about your next job. Ask them the kinds of questions you might ask if you spent a lot of money on a 360 exercise. If you're not familiar with that, a 360 exercise is when you reach out to individuals in your life and ask them through a survey instrument to give you feedback about how they see you. It's really helpful to hear from others what they think your strengths and areas of development are. So as you're thinking about how to jumpstart your career, you might start with this kitchen cabinet and tell them, I'm thinking about something new, but I'm trying to figure out the roadmap to get there. And you'd be surprised if you put that group together and ask them for 2 or 3 names of people that they know in the space that you'd like to move into. You begin to then strengthen a network. They can make an introduction. You can meet with that person. They may become that mentor, that sponsor that helps you get to the next place that you want to be in your career.
Colette, can I jump in real quick on that to kind of piggyback on what Michele said? Because I actually do have something similar to that personal kitchen cabinet. And the one thing that I also, that I make sure that I have within that are folks who will tell it to me straight, who will disagree with me and tell me exactly what they think. I mean, it's easy to have a bunch of people together who will tell you what you want to hear, but it's very important to have folks who will tell you straight and tell you, no, I think you're doing this incorrectly. This is an alternative way of thinking. I think it's very, very important that you have folks who will push you in a different way of thinking and a different mindset. So to build on exactly what you were saying, Michele, I couldn't agree with you more because I've adopted something similar to that. And some of them are very close friends. They don't all necessarily have to be friends. They, it's great if they're friendly. But they don't all necessarily have to be your closest friends, because sometimes your closest friends are the ones who are least likely to tell you something you don't want to hear for fear of harming the friendship or damaging the relationship. So sometimes it has to be folks who will tell it to you straight and will tell you what you don't want to hear. So to kind of build off of that, I think what you were saying was spot on. But I just wanted to kind of add my 2 cents because I have something very similar to what you have.
Absolutely. So I have a question for you, Leverett.
I was going to beat you to it, but you go ahead. Go ahead.
What is your wellness strategy in this space? How are you staying calm? I've had a chance to interact with you a couple times just even today, and there's a Zen thing about you in the middle of a storm, and I'm just wondering how you are maintaining your inner core as you work through this.
You would call it Zen. My wife would call it immaturity. I think it's a sense of humor. It's kind of having a sense that there is something bigger than you at work, and not taking yourself so seriously, knowing that you are a sort of a smaller part of something as a whole, similar to the seminar. We are a small part of this, our larger network of partners and our larger almost 1,400 alumni that are out there. We're just a small part of that, and we're here to help. So it's kind of keeping a sense of perspective, kind of, and kind of, again, I think focusing on yourself and your personal health. It's been very sort of how to keep myself whole has been setting a schedule out and this is something that I haven't been able to do up until COVID-19, is because you're constantly caught up in the day-to-day, and you can't slow down. This has forced me personally to slow down. Clearly there are other folks out there who just cannot slow down. You talk about the first responders, you talk about the essential personnel, they can't slow down. But for those of us who have that opportunity, I've kind of laid out a schedule where I do work for X amount. I do exercise, I do some working out for X amount, and then to make my wife happy, which is happy wife, happy life, I clean now. I have not cleaned in about, I won't tell you how long it's been since I haven't cleaned, but I've taken it to do all these little projects that I've promised her that I would do for the past years. And I've started to do that. So this is an opportunity that I have, which a lot of people don't have, but I do have that opportunity, and trying to keep myself whole physically. I mentioned earlier, physical well-being, spiritual well-being, and state of mind, mental health well-being. So it's all built into that. So how about yourself? I was actually I'll ask you something different after, but how about yourself? How are you working with that?
So I have been the beneficiary. Little programming note: my son's getting my charger for my laptop. I have been connecting with people through Zoom. So I'm a proud member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated.
Oh, nice.
And last Sunday was the 96th anniversary of my undergraduate chapter. And about 40 of us, you can plug it in there, sweetheart. About 50 of us who pledged in the Boston area in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and the 2000s joined a Zoom call. Thank you, Cameron. To connect and to tell our stories about, our most proud moment of being a member of the sorority, what it meant for us to be in this club. And it was 2 hours of bliss with some women I knew and some women I didn't know, but we had this bond. And I try to have a Zoom meeting with somebody at least 2 or 3 times a week. It breaks up the monotony. It makes me feel connected. And the other thing I've been doing is working on my meditation practice. Mm-hmm. And I really describe it as a practice because sitting still and trying to just stay calm in the storm is a real challenge. Like, I'm trying to resist the urge every morning of immediately turning on the news and seeing where we are, right? That's not the way to start my morning. I'm gonna be bold, that's it, right? And giving myself permission to be sad about what's going on. I mean, at this point, I think a lot of us have lost people that we love to COVID. And we don't have the normal mourning ceremonies. We don't have funerals right now. So, my best friend's mom passed away a couple of weeks ago of COVID, and we had a Zoom memorial session, and it made all of us feel better. But giving myself permission to be human in this moment has been very helpful. And
Yeah,
sometimes it's sad and sometimes it's pretty scary.
and I think you mentioned earlier, allowing yourself to be vulnerable. A vulnerability, and just kind of, this has put so many different things in perspective. So all the petty things that we would otherwise get upset about, it has really put all of that into perspective. To kind of piggyback off of what you said, I had a dear friend who I've known now for 30 something years. He lost both parents within 10 days of each other. And other than being there by text or phone, it's impossible to be there for somebody. So what we ended up doing, again, this is kind of, how would you be innovative, or how would you kind of modify how you're going to support somebody? So we went and we sent him a giant care package. And my wife has I probably shouldn't say this, but my wife has a free Disney Plus membership, with up to 4 people. She offered them the password and everything, just so, because they have a newborn, they have a not a newborn, but a kindergartner, and just to kind of give them some space and some stability and a little bit of a distraction. You try to think of different ways. You have to be as innovative and as different thinking as possible. So again, sort of what you were going back to, vulnerability, and just knowing, and just being able to say, I don't have all the answers. How do I get all the answers? And either you come up with the answers, or you rely on your networks. You go to your networks or your team, as you were mentioning, your team. You go to your team and you say, I don't have all the answers. And people step up. And that's actually one of the wonderful things that you're seeing now. For the most part, people are stepping up. And I say to my son, who is a little bit cynical, he's a teenager now, so he's a little bit cynical. And I point out all of the good things that folks are doing. You hear all the terrible news, and you hear some of the ridiculous stuff coming. I'm in government, so I say a lot of the ridiculous stuff coming out of government. But then you look at the heroes, and they don't even necessarily have to be heroes. You look at the everyday workers who are allowing us to get through this, to get through this on a day-to-day basis, who don't get the recognition they deserve. So it's those types of folks that we can point to and say, look, there are the good folks there. They are making a difference. They are being as innovative as possible. Because there's no roadmap to this. You yourself said this as well. There's no roadmap for this. So everybody kind of has to make their own way and be as innovative as possible and adaptable as possible. So that's so to piggyback on what you said, I couldn't agree more. So.
Well, there's something that I would like to add. I'm back. And I was going to say that there are people who are not, the 3 of us here have great networks. We all know a lot of people, but there are people out there who may not have networks. And one of the things I would encourage all of us to do is to do wellness checks on our friends and people that we know are out there. Human nature, sometimes we tend to suffer in silence, and people feel embarrassed about calling and saying they're lonely or feeling some sense of despair. So I want to encourage all of us to take that extra step to really connect. Even now, right now on this Zoom, networking, you can still network even in a new reality. We can still
I'm gonna type in my email address if folks want to connect with me.
Yeah, I'll do the same.
I'm doing it. See, once again, learning a new skill. I was always going to just send it to you. So all panelists and attendees. So I'm typing in my email address so that everybody can have it and we can network after this event.
Absolutely. I'm going to ask, one of the things that I want to do with my friend Gary Bailey. I want Gary to pull together a group of people who are in both psychiatry, psychology, and social work and therapy to really do a Get Connected wellness and mental health sort of a power up, if you will, for all of us. And I don't think there is always, when people talk about mental health or mental illness, there is sort of a stigma. You know, if you say to somebody, a person has cancer, you feel empathic. But somehow people tend to not want to engage or talk about despair, loneliness, isolation, and this is not the time for that. I believe that social distancing and isolation doesn't mean that you have to disconnect from the world. I think this is a time, if there was ever a time for people to have connectivity and interaction and to network and to connect to each other, this is it. Let me see if there are any more questions that have come about from our team here, our group of people who are asking Q&A. I don't see any questions in our box. Does anybody see anything? I will ask either Michele or Leverett this question. What is I'm going to ask you a two-pronged question. What is the best advice you ever got from a mentor, an advisor, a sponsor? And then what's the worst advice that you ever got?
Oh, geez, that's a tough one. I'll let Michele go first because I actually need some time to think about that one. See, I just threw you under the bus, Michele. I'm going to have you go. I'm trying to think. That's a good question.
I'll answer from under the bus. I'm just kidding. I guess the best advice that I've gotten is not to suffer. Sometimes people will make a commitment early in their career to do something and feel like they can't get off of that Ferris wheel. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it's further than the truth. You can reinvent, you can try new things. It's a matter of finding the right calculated risk, an opportunity where you can add value, but there's still a lot of headroom for you to learn. And I think there are many opportunities that fit that bill. So the worst advice that I think I got, that's a tougher question. I really can't think of bad advice I got, except when somebody wanted me to be in a role to meet their needs and I was no longer fulfilled in that role. And so I think that sometimes you have to measure advice, even from mentors, about what's good for you versus what's good for the universe. You know, for many years, I guess as I'm thinking about this, for many years I ran a corporate foundation. I loved that role. It was a great role and I have not looked back. It's not as if I want to recreate that moment, but it was a wonderful and impactful period of my life. But when I was ready to do something else, and I reached out to some people, they were like, but you've got this role and you write important checks to, you know, important organizations. And how can we be assured that those organizations will get the same funding if you're not there to do that? And I had to release that energy because it wasn't my responsibility into affinity to assure that this organization or that organization got the funding that I could provide. Perhaps somebody else might innovate and come up with something different. But I had to let go of that. And I had to let go of that energy that other people gave me that would have had me in that chair much longer than I was prepared to sit in that chair.
Those are good answers, Michele. I would jump in here, give Leverett a little more time to say the best advice that I got from a mentor of mine is to not take anything personally. That sometimes when people are acting out and not being positive, that it really has nothing to do with you, with me. This is their stuff, and you shouldn't take their stuff to be your stuff. You have no idea what's going on in people's lives. You don't know why they're reacting the way they do. So don't personalize it. And then the worst advice I ever got was from someone who told me that I shouldn't go into business for myself. I shouldn't start a business. So that was the worst advice. And I don't think they were telling me that because they were coming from a place of negativity. They were really coming from a place of concern, because Boston is not the easiest place to navigate as a person of color. And they were concerned that putting my shingle out there, that I might get disappointed, because it is such a tough town to break barriers and to, and look at me now. So I'm glad I did take that advice.
No,
So
definitely look at you now, Colette. Look at you now. So I guess the best advice I ever got was and thank you for giving me time to think about that, because I've gotten so much advice, and it's hard to filter out the good and the bad sometimes. But the best advice I ever got was to follow my passion, and that came from a number of different folks. I grew up in Chelsea, Massachusetts, and we grew up in a triple decker in Chelsea, as back when I was growing up, was the third lowest per capita income city in the entire state. And so we grew up in a poorer city, and the expectation from folks was that you have to go and you have to follow the money. You have to follow, without the money you can't. And there are very, very good points about you need the money, you need to survive, you have to support your family. But at the same time, following the money, it will only get you so far. And so one of the things that a mentor once told me was, follow your passion and then the money will follow, or success will follow. And I've been fortunate enough to find different professions and different jobs and different careers that have allowed me to fulfill that passion. Even when I was doing real estate, I was managing real estate, like I mentioned, close to $7 million in assets. It wasn't my passion, but I was able to find something in that I could be passionate about, where you could help your tenants. You could help folks find different services. I mean, most of the real estate was in Chelsea and Revere, poorer cities and towns. And you could help them find those types of resources which they weren't able to find before. So something, even if you're in a position where you can't, where it may not, the whole job may not be fulfilling as a whole, but within that you can find that sliver of a passion to kind of help fulfill you. That is something that was the best advice that I ever got, was find your passion and follow that passion. I guess piggybacking off of that, the worst advice was follow the money. And again, there is a lot of logic to that, because you have to feed your family, you have to provide for everybody. But following the money to what end? I mean, there's different types of happiness. I mentioned before, there's physical well-being, there's spiritual well-being, and then there's emotional well-being. And those are the three components, and following the money for me didn't fulfill all of those. And so now I'm running the seminar. I've been able to, I went through the list of things that I've been able to do, and fortunately I've been able to follow my passion through all of those, and it's been fulfilling. So.
Well, that's a very good answer, Leverett. And you reminded me, as we were thinking, as you were talking, that who would have ever thought that companies would now have chief people officers, just like they have chief resilient officers, chief people officers, people who are, there are lots of companies that are now getting into emotional intelligence. Once upon a time, you didn't emote at work. You had to keep a stiff upper lip, and now people are recognizing that you want your employees to bring their whole authentic self to the workplace. And we are not automatons. We can't just shut off our emotions. And I want to say this as we get ready to wind down, as we talk about emotional intelligence. I want to talk about the fact that the COVID-19 has impacted every single person and community, but no one more so than people of color. For example, there are more Black and brown people dying from COVID, and the just horrendous assault on our Asian brothers and sisters, from physical to emotional to online bullying. And I think that all of us need to stand up as allies and to shout down and to speak up and speak out about this. It is not acceptable behavior. And I want to see the companies that have Asian employees also stand up and speak out to become advocates and allies for their employees, and to speak out about the inequity in the healthcare system that is devastating Black and brown people and communities. So I feel that that is very, very important. And for those who are on this call who might be in positions of authority in HR or in roles, C-suite roles, I want to challenge you to do so. And I want to give a shout out to a mentor of both myself and Leverett, and Helen.
Hey.
In Schlitzie.
Helen.
And we are so glad to have you here.
Bow down to Aunt Helen.
Absolutely. Helen is the mentor for, so she was Get Konnected before Get Konnected was Get Connected. Helen knows everybody in Boston, and she's just, I am so blessed to have her as a mentor, a sponsor, and a dear, dear friend. So I'm glad she's on this call. Michele, is there anything you would like to, both you and Leverett would like to close out with before we end this session?
I guess I would just say that as bleak as it might feel in this moment, we're going to get through this as a city, as a society, and we need to hold on to that thought. And, following up, Colette, to your very well-expressed passion about equity, both health, racial, economic equity, I'd just like to lift up all the essential workers and hope that at the end of this journey, we find ways to support that very hardworking segment in our society, because we are so tied to their wellness and their success in life. And we've got to figure out ways in which we continue to provide portals for their economic growth and development and their safety.
Leverett, and there is one more question that Liz Chen, the general manager, president of WGBH and World TV, asked. WGBH is a partner, a corporate partner of Get Konnected, and she wanted to know, what is the toughest lesson either of you have ever learned on your own?
Well, I guess first of all, I want to give a shout out to Liz. Last night, WGBH and World hosted our annual Asian American Heritage Month celebration. I think it's our 12th annual or 14th annual Heritage Month celebration. And Usually we have it in person, and usually we have it at WGBH's studios, but clearly we couldn't have it this year. So Liz and her team and the folks at WGBH put on an incredible show. Talk about thinking innovatively, talk about thinking outside the box. Liz and her team put on an incredible show, along with a good friend of ours, Dr. Pam Edinger, the president of Bunker Hill Community College, who moderated a panel. And there's going to be a fantastic 5-hour series on PBS called Asian Americans in celebration of Asian American Heritage Month. So I do want to give a big shout out to Liz and to WGBH on that. And because I was doing that, I completely forgot the question. I think, the hardest lesson
you have learned on your own.
See, the hardest lesson I learned was, and this, I know we're running short, but this is a little bit of a longer story. The hardest lesson I learned is that sometimes the mountaintop is not as wonderful as you would perceive it to be. When I went, and you mentioned the role that I had at Asian and Pacific Islander American Vote in DC, API Vote. It was a wonderful gig. The work was fantastic. The job we did, the mission is fantastic. The organization itself is fantastic. And I targeted that job. I wanted to be the executive director of that back when they came to Boston for the Democratic National Convention in the early 2000s or mid 2000s. And I targeted that job. And 4 years later, I went after it with such aggression, and I got it. I even flew out to California. I took my family on a forced vacation so I could go out there and interview for the job. And I got the job. And I realized that even though the job itself and the mission itself and the work itself was wonderful, it was, and this goes back to sort of self-fulfillment and happiness and wholeness. I realized that traveling, when I had a 6-year-old at home, and when my mother had developed rheumatoid arthritis, traveling was not good for me. I was miserable, and me being personally miserable and me being not able to be whole made me horrible at the job. And so that's sort of I chased the goal, I chased the holy grail, and I got it. And I got to the mountaintop, and I'm at the mountaintop, I'm like, wow, it kind of stinks up here. I mean, the job itself was wonderful, but me not being able to be whole really was just I was unsuccessful at it because I personally was not happy and fulfilled. And so I was able to follow my passion of civic engagement, but my other passion was making my family happy and making my family whole. And so that was the toughest lesson that I ever had to learn. Was I thought I could have it all in that one thing, and I just couldn't. And then after that, sort of to go off on, sort of resiliency and how you can be supported during times like this, during COVID-19, how it all ties in. I relied on my networks. I relied on my networks to prop me back up and to get me back up to where I needed to be, and to get me, sort of push me forward, and to kind of help make me whole. And to go back to what Michele said, that vulnerability, that admitting that you're vulnerable, admitting that you don't know it all, admitting that you need that help, and then kind of taking all of that into account and bringing it all together. That's what made me whole again. So that was the toughest lesson, and that kind of tying into what Get Connected does is the networking. Those networks can help in the worst of times and in the most difficult of times, professionally and personally. It couldn't have gotten much worse for me. The networks are the things that made me whole again.
Thank you, Leverett and Michele. We are so fortunate to have such great members of the Get Connected network, CEO network. You guys have been a part of this since we began. And, this is just such a wonderful, your input, your wisdom, your counsel has helped countless people over the years and tonight. So thank you. And we want to thank all of our attendees who are on this Zoom conference. Thank you for tuning in. Our next, Ariel, when is our next Zoom? I think our next mentoring is next Tuesday.
Next Tuesday, yes.
Pardon?
Yes, next Tuesday.
Yes, so we want you all to come back. We'll have 2 more wonderful thought leaders, mentors, and C-suiters. So this is good. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Colette. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Daryl. I see Daryl settles.
Oh, no way. Hey,
Daryl's there. And Gary,
everybody.
thank you all.